Sometimes life pushes a man so far down that he'll cling to anything that offers even the faintest glimpse of hope, even if it feels like stepping into another storm. Caleb Rourke knew that feeling all too well. A 50-year-old Iraq War veteran haunted by memories he couldn't escape, he spent years wandering from town to town with only his loyal German shepherd, Valor, by his side. Then, one spring morning, a letter arrived. A relative he had never met, Ethan Blackwood, had left him an abandoned Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Ashford Hollow, Virginia. The place had been empty for more than 30 years, rotting beneath vines and broken shingles. The townsfolk whispered about it, calling it the Blackwood Curse, a money pit of cracked foundations and endless repairs. Caleb thought he had nothing to lose. With Valor beside him, he figured he could put in the work, one nail and one broken board at a time, and maybe, just maybe, build a home again. But Ethan hadn't only left behind peeling wallpaper and dusty windows. Beneath the silence of that forgotten mansion, secrets were waiting. Secrets hidden for generations. And as Caleb and Valor stepped through the creaking front doors, neither of them knew they were about to uncover a mystery that could change everything or destroy them both. A soft spring fog drifted lazily across Ashford Hollow, a quiet Virginian town nestled between hills and thick woods. The air was damp and cool, carrying the scent of wet earth and budding wildflowers. Morning light spilled through broken clouds, muted and pale, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Caleb Rourke stood at the edge of the cracked driveway, staring at the house looming before him like a forgotten memory. 50 years old, he was a man carved from hardship. Tall, broad-shouldered, with short, steel-gray hair and a rugged beard peppered with silver. His blue-gray eyes, once sharp with youth and resolve, now carried the weight of battles fought both overseas and within. He bore the quiet air of someone who had seen too much, the kind of man who carried his ghosts in silence. His left knee still stiffened on cold mornings, a reminder of the roadside explosion outside Fallujah that had ended his military career and shattered his faith in second chances. Beside him sat Valor, his loyal 5-year-old German shepherd, powerful and alert, his thick black and tan coat dampened by the mist. Valor had once served alongside Caleb in Iraq, trained to sniff out explosives and danger. Sharp amber eyes scanned their surroundings constantly, ears twitching at every faint sound. Where Caleb's steps hesitated, Valor's were steady. Where Caleb's spirit faltered, Valor's instincts guided him forward. The bond between them was unspoken but unbreakable, forged through survival and shared scars. The Blackwood Mansion rose before them, an aging Victorian relic smothered by decades of neglect. The wraparound porch sagged like an exhausted breath, its carved columns cracked and splintered, ivy creeping greedily up its sides. Several windows were shattered, others boarded over, and the roof was missing tiles and jagged patches that made it look like a toothless grin. For more than 30 years it had stood silent, rotting beneath layers of dust and rumor. Locals called it the Blackwood Curse. Some whispered that strange lights flickered in its tower at night. Others swore they heard voices when the wind rushed through its broken shutters. Caleb tightened his grip on the worn leather leash in his hand, though Valor didn't need it. His chest rose and fell slowly, unevenly, as if he had to force air into his lungs. He hated this feeling. The sensation of stepping into someone else's unfinished story. "This is it, buddy," he muttered softly, his voice rough and low. Valor turned his head and nudged Caleb's thigh gently, as if sensing the storm in his thoughts. The letter still weighed in his jacket pocket, its words short, stark, and strange. To Caleb Rourke, you are the last living heir of Ethan Blackwood. The estate of Ashford Hollow, along with the Blackwood mansion, is legally yours. He had never met Ethan. His mother had rarely spoken of that side of the family, and his father had left before Caleb turned 6. Yet here he was, standing before the decaying monument of a man whose blood he shared, but whose life remained a mystery. A creak behind him broke his thoughts. Caleb turned to see a woman approaching slowly along the gravel path. Margaret Henderson, 68, was the kind of person the town depended on for gossip, history, and homemade remedies in equal measure. Her small frame was wrapped in a pale blue cardigan, silver-gray hair pinned into a neat bun, and her soft face lined with the kind of wrinkles born from both laughter and loss. She carried herself with a quiet authority, her pale green eyes sharp despite her gentle voice. "You must be Caleb," she said, her tone low, like someone entering sacred ground. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, adjusting his stance politely. "I suppose I am." Margaret studied him for a long moment before glancing toward the mansion. "I live just down the road," she said. "Been here 40 years. That house has been trouble since before you were born." Valor sniffed the air in her direction, tail twitching once, his instincts sizing her up. Margaret bent slightly, extending a careful hand. Valor gave a single short sniff, then looked back to Caleb as though approving her presence. "They called it cursed, you know," Margaret continued softly, her gaze fixed on the towering structure. "People say your great-uncle Ethan was different. Brilliant, maybe, but troubled. After his wife died, he shut himself away in that place. And then one day, he just disappeared. No goodbyes, no answers. The mansion's been rotting ever since." Caleb followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. He'd seen too many bodies vanish in the sands of Iraq. The idea of someone simply disappearing left a sour taste in his mouth. Did anyone ever look for him? "Some tried," Margaret replied, clasping her hands together. "But no one found anything. Some think he ran off, others think he never left." The words settled heavy between them, hanging in the fog. Caleb felt Valor press lightly against his leg, ears flicking forward, sensing something he couldn't yet name. After Margaret left, Caleb walked the perimeter of the property, Valor pacing steadily beside him. Every board creaked, every gust of wind seemed to groan through the skeletal walls. But then Valor stopped. His ears pinned back, muscles taut, tail rigid as he sniffed furiously at the damp ground near the far edge of the yard. Suddenly, he let out a sharp, throaty bark, claws scraping against the earth as he began digging into the softened soil. "Easy, boy," Caleb said, kneeling beside him. He reached forward to still Valor's paws, but hesitated when he felt it too, a slight hollowness beneath the dirt, a faint vibration through the ground. Something was buried there. The air around them grew strangely still. Caleb's heartbeat quickened, his chest tight with the familiar edge of tension he used to feel right before a raid. Every instinct screamed at him to move, but he stayed frozen, watching as Valor's nose pressed deep into the earth, his low growl rumbling like distant thunder. Caleb swallowed hard, forcing the breath out slowly through his nose. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Valor lifted his head, amber eyes locking on Caleb's, and gave a single sharp bark, the kind he used in Iraq when he'd found something dangerous. Caleb's hands curled into fists unconsciously, fingernails digging into his palms. A prickle crawled up the back of his neck. He stood, scanning the fog-soaked yard, half expecting to see shadows moving in the mist. Nothing. Just silence, broken only by Valor's steady growls. Somewhere beneath their feet, beneath 3 decades of soil and secrets, something was waiting. Caleb straightened his shoulders and gave Valor a firm pat. "We'll come back to this," he said, his voice low, steadying himself more than the dog. He forced his legs to carry him toward the front porch, though every step felt heavier than the last. As he climbed the creaking stairs and placed his hand on the cold brass handle of the front door, Valor let out another warning bark, louder this time, his body bristling, claws scraping against the porch. Caleb hesitated, his fingers tight on the handle, his chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths. He didn't know why, but deep down, something told him that stepping through that door wasn't just entering a house. It was opening a story that had been waiting for him his entire life. And somewhere beneath the roots of Ashford Hollow, secrets were clawing to be found. The silence inside the Blackwood mansion was heavy, thick with 30 years of neglect. Dust floated in thin shafts of light cutting through the boarded windows, and the faint smell of mildew clung to the air. Caleb Rourke stepped carefully across the warped hardwood floor, his boots pressing softly against history buried under grime. Behind him, Valor, his loyal 5-year-old German shepherd, padded quietly but alert, amber eyes darting with precision as his nose worked overtime. Caleb had trusted Valor's instincts on battlefields before, and he trusted them here, maybe even more. The living room was vast but suffocated under decay. The faded wallpaper peeled in long curling strips, revealing wooden panels beneath. An ancient chandelier hung crooked, its once pristine crystals now dull and gray. A fireplace dominated one wall, its stone mantel cracked but still sturdy, and beside it, an empty space where something, a portrait maybe, had once hung. Caleb took in the room like a soldier scouting unfamiliar terrain, cataloging details without even meaning to. He ran his hand along the chipped banister of the grand staircase, his breath quiet but heavy. Part of him had expected to feel something here, a memory, a connection, but so far the mansion gave nothing back. "Come on, Valor," Caleb muttered. "Let's see what secrets you can sniff out." At the sound of his name, Valor's ears perked, and he moved swiftly toward the far wall near the parlor door. His body tensed, tail rigid, as he lowered his snout to the baseboards, sniffing hard, his claws clicking softly against the floor. Then, without warning, he let out a low growl. Deep, guttural, the kind Caleb had learned long ago meant he'd found something unusual. Caleb crouched beside him, pressing his palm lightly against the wall. The wallpaper there was intact, but beneath his fingertips the wood felt hollow. He glanced down at Valor, who barked once, sharp and urgent, his amber eyes flashing toward the base panel like an order. All right, Caleb whispered, pulling a small folding knife from his jacket pocket. He carefully slid the blade beneath the aged wallpaper and peeled it back in a slow strip, exposing dark, dry wood underneath. But not just wood. Carved into the panel were faint markings, worn by time but still visible. They weren't random scratches. They were deliberate. Symbols almost compass-like, intersecting circles and pointed stars etched deep into the grain. Caleb's breath slowed, his heartbeat rising in his chest. He traced one symbol lightly with his finger and felt its grooves, smooth from repeated touches long ago. He leaned back on his heels and whispered to Valor, "You were right, buddy. Someone left this here on purpose. Valor's ears twitched, but his attention shifted suddenly upward, his head jerking toward the ceiling. He emitted a low rumble from his chest and stepped backward, eyes fixed on the exposed beams above. Caleb followed his gaze and froze. The plaster on the ceiling was cracked in several places, and near the far corner above the fireplace, faint engravings were visible, hidden beneath years of soot. They mirrored the symbols on the panel perfectly. Compass points and interlocked rings arranged in precise patterns. Before Caleb could process the meaning, a soft knock echoed from the front door, sharp against the silence. He straightened quickly, his hand automatically falling to his sidearm, a habit he hadn't shaken since Iraq. Valor moved to his side, shoulders tense, silent but ready. The door creaked open slowly, and Margaret Henderson stepped inside, carrying a small wicker basket in one hand. Her pale green eyes flicked around the room warily before settling on Caleb's face. "You're digging already," she said softly, her voice as even as the fog outside. "I should have known." Caleb stood, brushing dust off his palms. "Didn't think anyone would mind me looking around my own house." Margaret set the basket on the old table, straightened her cardigan, and sighed. "It isn't just a house, Caleb. This place has been the center of more trouble than you realize." She stepped closer, her thin hands clasped together tightly. Her usually composed face carried a tension he hadn't seen before. "The Sterling family," she said quietly, lowering her voice as if the mansion itself might be listening. "They've been after this place for decades, since before Ethan disappeared. They believe there's something hidden here, something worth fighting for." Caleb frowned, his brows knitting tightly. "The Sterlings? I don't know the name." "You wouldn't," Margaret replied, shaking her head, her silver hair glinting faintly in the dim light. "Your Uncle Ethan and Robert Sterling were business partners once, long before you were born. It ended badly. Lawsuits, accusations, ruined lives. The Sterlings claimed Ethan stole something from them, something they could never prove, but they never stopped believing it. They've been waiting for someone to inherit this house, Caleb, and now that someone is you." A bitter laugh escaped Caleb's throat before he could stop it. "So they think I've inherited more than rotten floorboards?" Margaret's expression remained grave. "I think they'll come looking. They always do." Caleb's shoulders stiffened, a silent shadow crossing his features. He thought of Valor's strange digging outside, the hollow panel beneath his fingertips, the engravings overhead. Something was buried here, maybe not just in the ground, but in the history of this house. "Do you know anything about these?" he asked, pointing at the exposed symbols on the wall. Margaret stepped closer, her green eyes narrowing as she studied them. Her face paled slightly. "I haven't seen those in decades," she whispered. "Ethan used to draw them in his journals, said they were part of an old family code. Directions, maybe, or warnings. I don't know, but if those markings are here—" She hesitated, lowering her gaze to Valor, who sat rigidly watching the ceiling as if he could feel the weight above them. "Then you're closer to the truth than anyone has been in years." Caleb's jaw tightened as the weight of her words sank in. He reached up and touched the carvings again, his rough fingers tracing the curves of symbols carved by someone who had wanted them found, but only by the right person. Behind them, Valor padded softly to the corner of the room, nose pressed low, sniffing around the floorboards. Then, suddenly, he stopped and growled, low, sharp, controlled. He pawed once at a narrow gap in the baseboard, his claws scraping faintly. Caleb crouched again and followed his lead. He wedged his knife into the seam and pried gently until the board shifted free with a faint crack. Inside, wedged carefully into a recess, lay a small brass key, dulled with age but still intact. Its head was heart-shaped, engraved with the same compass-like symbols, delicate and intricate, catching the dim light like a secret whisper. Caleb turned it over in his palm, the cool weight sinking into his calloused skin. "A key?" he muttered softly. Margaret's expression hardened. "Whatever that opens, Caleb, it was meant for you, but you'd better believe the Sterlings want it too." He slipped the key carefully into his jacket pocket, Valor sitting close, watching the room like a silent sentinel. The house creaked softly, a groan that echoed faintly above them. Caleb looked up once more at the ceiling, the strange symbols etched into the beams, and felt a chill run through his chest despite the spring warmth outside. For the first time since he arrived in Ashford Hollow, Caleb realized the inheritance wasn't just about land or history. It was about secrets. Secrets buried deep, and some that might be dangerous to uncover. As the shadows stretched across the parlor and Valor's ears pricked towards distant sounds outside, Caleb glanced at Margaret. "Looks like the easy part's over," he said quietly. Margaret nodded, her lips tightening into a thin line. "It hasn't even begun." The afternoon sun slid lower behind the jagged treetops of Ashford Hollow, throwing long, sharp shadows across the Blackwood mansion's weathered facade. Inside, the air was still and heavy, carrying the faint musk of dust, damp wood, and secrets waiting to be uncovered. Caleb Rourke moved carefully through the hallway, his boots creaking softly against the warped floorboards. Valor padded beside him, tail low but ears pricked forward, alert to sounds Caleb couldn't hear. The small brass key in Caleb's pocket felt heavier than it should, as if it carried not just weight, but responsibility. After Margaret Henderson left earlier, her warnings about the Sterling family still echoed in his mind. He wanted to dismiss it as local gossip, but deep down, Caleb's instincts told him otherwise. In Iraq, he'd learned to trust his gut, and right now, his gut screamed that this house was more than rotting wood and forgotten history. Caleb wandered into a room he hadn't explored yet, a small study connected to the main hall. The smell of old paper and leather hit him immediately. Shelves lined the walls, though most sagged under the weight of collapsed stacks of books. A massive oak desk sat in the center, its surface covered in dust but surprisingly intact. Valor sniffed around the desk legs, his nose twitching rapidly before he gave a soft bark, alerting Caleb to something unusual. Caleb crouched down and noticed claw marks on the underside of the desk. Not Valor's, but old, deliberate scratches, like someone had tried to hide something. He ran his fingers along the grooves and felt a recessed latch. With a push, a hidden drawer clicked open. Inside lay a faded leather-bound album tied with a fraying ribbon, the edges browned and curling. Caleb carried it to the window where the soft afternoon light filtered through dirty glass, brushing the dust away carefully before opening it. The first photograph nearly stopped his breath. A younger Ethan Blackwood, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisp 1960s suit, smiled faintly at the camera. Beside him was a striking woman, her beauty timeless, Clara Monroe. Her wavy chestnut hair framed a pale, elegant face. Her lips curved faintly upward, but her soft gray eyes held a sadness Caleb couldn't place. She looked delicate, yet resilient, the kind of woman who carried quiet storms beneath composure. As Caleb flipped through more pages, his chest tightened. There were photos of Ethan and Clara together at a secluded lakeside in a sunlit garden, and once beneath the mansion's wraparound porch, their fingers barely touching but their closeness undeniable. Whoever took these pictures must have been discreet, as if capturing a love that wasn't meant to exist. Beneath one photo, scrawled faintly in Ethan's tight handwriting, "For the moments we stole when the world wasn't watching." Caleb exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of someone else's heartbreak bleeding through decades of silence. He set the album aside and noticed a small notebook tucked beneath it, the cover cracked with age. Inside were journal entries written by Ethan himself. As Caleb read, the story unfolded, one he hadn't expected to find. Ethan and Robert Sterling had once built a thriving business together, their partnership powerful and envied. But Ethan's secret relationship with Clara, Robert's wife, had destroyed everything. Clara had given birth to a child, a boy Robert claimed as his own, raising him under the Sterling name while severing Ethan's access completely. Ethan's words grew increasingly bitter in the entries. "I watch from the shadows as my son grows in another man's house. The fortune I helped build stolen from me, and my own blood erased from history." Caleb leaned back against the desk, rubbing a hand over his face. The tangled history between the Blackwoods and Sterlings suddenly felt heavier, explaining Margaret's warnings and the tension still alive decades later. A soft whine pulled Caleb from his thoughts. Valor stood by the doorway, tail stiff, his amber eyes locked on something down the hall. Without a sound, the dog trotted forward, nose pressed low to the ground as though following a scent trail invisible to Caleb. He grabbed his flashlight and followed close behind. Valor led him into the library, a grand but decaying space with towering shelves, a circular stained glass window at the far end, and furniture draped in yellowed sheets. The air was cooler here, damp and strangely still, and Caleb instinctively slowed his pace, senses sharpening like they used to on patrol. Suddenly, Valor stopped in front of a large oak bookshelf, planting his paws firmly as his tail lowered. He sniffed along the edges, growled softly, and pawed at the base. Caleb crouched, running his hands along the wood. That's when he felt it, an uneven panel beneath the lower shelf. With a grunt, he pushed his shoulder into the shelf, shifting it slightly. A hollow sound echoed behind it. Caleb pried carefully, revealing a hidden recess in the wall. Inside was a rolled-up parchment map tied with faded string. Spreading it out across the dusty reading table, Caleb traced the delicate ink lines with his fingertip. The map showed the entire mansion layout, but what caught his attention were the intricate markings beneath it, a network of underground tunnels winding below the property like veins beneath skin. There were small red symbols drawn at 3 locations, one directly under the library. Beside the map, Ethan had scribbled a note in tiny lettering. "The walls hide more than secrets. Find the heart before they do." Caleb stared at the words, jaw tightening as dread prickled along his spine. Before he could process the meaning, a sharp knock echoed from the front door, startling Valor into a low bark. Caleb froze, his hand instinctively brushing against his sidearm before he cautiously approached the entryway. Standing in the fading daylight was a man in his late 50s, tall and broad with salt and pepper hair neatly combed back. His square jaw and sharp cheekbones gave him an air of authority, but his pale blue eyes carried exhaustion, like someone who'd spent years chasing ghosts. He wore a tailored gray jacket and carried a leather folder under one arm. "I'm Thomas Keene," the man said, his deep voice steady but tired. "Ashford Hollow Historical Society. I handle estate records for properties like this." Caleb eyed him carefully. "Historical Society, huh?" Thomas nodded, maintaining polite composure. "The Blackwood Mansion has a complicated past. When I saw the deed transfer, I figured I should introduce myself before you hear 1,000 rumors from the wrong people." Caleb let him in cautiously, watching the man's every movement. Thomas's gaze swept over the dusty furniture and broken plaster before settling on the table where the map still lay partially rolled. His expression shifted, tightening subtly before he smoothed it out again. "I take it you found something," Thomas said softly, stepping closer to study the parchment. Caleb crossed his arms, body language guarded. "Just learning what I signed up for." Thomas hesitated, then lowered his voice. "You should be careful. The Sterlings have deep roots here, and long memories. If they learn what you've uncovered, they'll come for it, whatever it is." Valor growled faintly, as if sensing Thomas's tension. Caleb reached down, brushing his fingers across the dog's neck to calm him, though his own unease mirrored Valor's instincts. Thomas excused himself shortly after, but not before glancing once more at the map with something Caleb couldn't read. Recognition, maybe, or fear. When the door closed, Caleb leaned against it, rubbing his temple as Valor rested his head against Caleb's thigh. Between Ethan's forbidden love, the hidden tunnels, and the growing threat from the Sterling family, the weight of the Blackwood legacy pressed harder than ever. In the quiet of the decaying library, Caleb whispered, "Looks like we're digging up more than just dust, buddy." Valor's ears twitched and his tail gave a single, slow wag, ready for whatever came next. The spring evening settled heavily over Ashford Hollow, its silence interrupted only by the occasional rustle of wind through the brittle branches outside the Blackwood mansion. Inside, the dim amber glow from a single antique lamp barely pushed back the shadows crawling across the dusty walls. Caleb Rourke sat on the edge of the worn armchair in the study, the old map spread before him on the desk, tracing the winding tunnels Ethan had drawn beneath the mansion. Valor, the 5-year-old German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat, lay by his boots, ears twitching as though every creak in the house carried a secret. A sharp knock at the front door shattered the fragile quiet, making both Caleb and Valor jerk their heads toward the sound. Valor rose immediately, muscles taut, tail rigid, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Caleb rested a hand on his loyal companion's back before crossing the hallway and pulling the heavy oak door open. Standing there was a woman in her early 40s, tall and elegant, dressed in a dark navy suit tailored perfectly to her lean, athletic frame. Her golden blonde hair was swept back into a smooth bun, revealing high cheekbones and sharp green eyes that carried an intensity bordering on predatory. Her skin was pale and flawless, the kind of cold beauty that seemed deliberate, calculated. "Mr. Rourke, I presume?" Her voice was smooth, polished, and faintly edged with steel. She held out a sleek leather folder embossed with a silver crest. "I'm Rebecca Sterling," she said, "attorney at law, representing the Sterling family estate." The surname hit Caleb like a hammer. He studied her expression carefully, his jaw tightening, but kept his voice neutral. "I'm listening." Rebecca's red-painted lips curved faintly into what might pass as a smile, though there was no warmth in it. "The Blackwood Mansion is complicated property," she began, her tone confident and professional. "My father, Robert Sterling, partnered with Ethan Blackwood for many years, and while there were disputes, our records indicate unfinished claims on this land. I'm here to make you an offer." She opened the folder, revealing documents neatly arranged in embossed sleeves. $200,000, cash. Transfer within 48 hours. Valor growled louder this time, hackles rising as Rebecca stepped closer. His amber eyes locked onto her movements, and Caleb rested a hand on his dog's collar, instinctively aware of Valor's distrust. "You've done your homework," Caleb said slowly, scanning the paperwork without touching it. "But you came here uninvited, offering that much money before I've even unpacked my bags." His voice lowered. "That tells me this place is worth a hell of a lot more than you're saying." Rebecca's confident facade cracked slightly, though she quickly recovered. Her green eyes narrowed, and she tilted her head, studying him as if recalculating her strategy. "You don't know what you've inherited," she said softly, leaning forward just enough that Caleb caught a faint whiff of her perfume. Expensive, sharp, and clinical. "That house is a financial graveyard. Repairs alone will bankrupt you. Take the money while you still can." "I didn't survive Fallujah to be scared off by rotten wood," Caleb replied flatly, folding his arms across his chest. For the first time, Rebecca's smile disappeared entirely, replaced by something cold and unmasked. "You don't want to make an enemy of my family," she warned, her voice cutting through the stillness. "We have ways of resolving disputes." "Then we'll see where it goes," Caleb said, holding her gaze without flinching. Her sharp heels clicked against the worn wood as she left without another word, though not without glancing one last time at Valor, who bared his teeth in silent warning. That night, the mansion seemed to breathe differently. Shadows pooled in the corners where the light didn't reach, and every groan of the floorboards carried an eerie weight. Caleb sat awake in the library, reviewing Ethan's journal again, his mind circling Rebecca's sudden appearance and what it meant. Valor lay at his feet, but didn't relax. His ears twitched constantly, his chest rumbling with quiet suspicion as though he, too, sensed the lingering threat. Near midnight, Valor jolted upright, muscles taut, ears pinned forward. He gave a sharp bark and lunged toward the hallway, nails scraping against the old wood. Caleb immediately grabbed the flashlight from the desk and followed him. "Valor, easy," he whispered, but the German shepherd was already leading him toward the kitchen, his growl deep and unbroken. Caleb's heart pounded steadily as he trailed close, every instinct sharpened the way they had been during nighttime patrols overseas. They reached the basement door, an old, warped frame tucked beneath the staircase, half concealed behind a dusty rack of wine bottles. Caleb froze when he realized something strange. The door stood slightly ajar. He was sure he'd locked it earlier. Valor sniffed furiously, tail stiff, and then scratched at the floorboards just beside an old oak cabinet where cobwebs hung in layered curtains. Caleb moved the heavy piece of furniture aside, revealing a section of wall different from the rest, smooth stone instead of painted wood. He shined the flashlight across its surface and spotted a faint outline, almost invisible beneath layers of grime. There was a small metal indentation, shaped perfectly for the brass key Valor had found earlier. Caleb's pulse kicked hard against his ribs. Slowly, he inserted the key, feeling the old mechanism grind and click into place. With a groan that vibrated through the walls, a hidden stone door shifted backward and slid open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling into darkness below. Valor hesitated, ears flat against his skull, before letting out a soft, uncertain whine. Caleb crouched beside him, resting a steadying hand on the dog's neck. "I know, buddy," he whispered. "We're not alone in this." From somewhere deep below, a faint draft of cold, damp air carried an earthy smell, like soil untouched for decades. It chilled Caleb's skin as he stared down into the abyss, realizing this was just the beginning. Whatever lay beneath the Blackwood mansion wasn't meant to be found easily, and Rebecca Sterling's sudden interest only confirmed his growing suspicion. He flicked off the flashlight, secured the basement door, and led Valor back upstairs, deciding they would explore the passage in daylight, when shadows weren't their enemy. But his mind raced long into the night, restless with the knowledge that every creak in the house could be something, or someone, waiting. The morning sun barely cut through the pale mist hanging over Ashford Hollow, bathing the Blackwood mansion in a muted, golden haze. Inside, the air carried a damp, earthy scent as Caleb Rourke stood at the edge of the open passage revealed behind the basement's hidden door. The narrow staircase spiraled downward into darkness, rough stone walls lined with moisture-streaked marks. His breathing was steady, but his heartbeat drummed in his ears, a sensation he hadn't felt since Iraq. Beside him, Valor, the 5-year-old German shepherd with thick black and tan fur, stood alert, muscles taut, ears pricked forward, and tail stiff, every sense tuned to what lay beneath. Caleb adjusted the strap of his worn leather satchel, slung across his shoulder and packed with Ethan's map, a flashlight, and a sturdy crowbar. He crouched, brushing a hand over Valor's neck, feeling the dog's steady but tense tremble. "All right, buddy," he whispered. "Let's see what Ethan was hiding." Step by step, they descended the cold stone stairs. The deeper they went, the cooler and damper the air became, carrying a metallic tang that clung to Caleb's throat. Each echo of their boots against stone reverberated like distant thunder, adding weight to the silence. Halfway down, Caleb noticed faded engravings along the stairwell walls, intricate carvings of compass roses, interlocking circles, and names half eroded by time. He traced one symbol with his fingertips, recognizing the same patterns etched into the brass key they'd found days earlier. At the base of the stairs, the passage widened into a cavern-like chamber carved directly from the bedrock beneath the mansion. Thick wooden beams supported the vaulted ceiling, still sturdy despite their age. Dusty cobwebs hung like lace between stone columns, and the faint scent of parchment and rust drifted through the stagnant air. Valor padded forward, nose low to the ground, sniffing intently. His claws clicked softly against the smooth stone, and then he stopped, ears swiveling sharply to the left. Caleb followed his gaze and spotted what looked like an ornate wooden cabinet, its surface darkened by decades of neglect. Kneeling beside it, he tugged on the rusted handle. Locked. "Not for long," Caleb muttered. Pulling the brass key from his pocket, he slid it into a small indentation hidden beneath the drawer. The mechanism clicked softly, and the cabinet door creaked open, releasing a stale, cold gust of trapped air. Inside lay a meticulously organized compartment, stacks of leather-bound journals, financial ledgers, sealed envelopes, and several small velvet pouches. Caleb's brow furrowed as he lifted one of the pouches and felt the unmistakable weight of gold coins. Another pouch revealed neatly folded $100 bills, their edges yellowed but crisp. But the real prize lay beneath. A weathered metal box, locked but light enough to lift. Its lid bore the initials E.B., Ethan Blackwood. With a flick of his crowbar, Caleb pried it open. Inside were financial documents that made his chest tighten. Signed contracts, bank transfers, and evidence detailing how Robert Sterling had siphoned millions from Blackwood's accounts through shell companies and falsified records. Among them was a faded legal memorandum dated over 30 years ago, stamped confidential in bold red ink. Confirmation that Ethan had uncovered Robert's betrayal, but had hidden the evidence before confronting him. "Valor," Caleb whispered, his throat tight. This changes everything." Valor, however, wasn't looking at the documents. His ears twitched, nostrils flaring as he shifted his weight, tail low, growling softly. Caleb froze, listening. A faint scuff of boots against stone echoed from somewhere deeper in the tunnels, subtle but deliberate. He killed the flashlight, plunging the chamber into darkness, and crouched low beside Valor, resting a steadying hand on the dog's back. From the shadows, voices murmured. A woman's sharp tone carried first, controlled but tense. "He found it. I told you he'd find it." Caleb's stomach knotted. Rebecca Sterling. Footsteps approached, the sound bouncing off the stone walls until 3 figures emerged into the faint glow spilling from the stairwell above. Rebecca led them, still dressed immaculately despite the damp chill underground. Her blonde hair was tied back into a tighter bun today, her green eyes glinting like polished glass beneath the dim light. Behind her were 2 men Caleb had never seen before. Hired muscle, judging by their size and demeanor. The first, Grant Myers, looked to be in his late 30s, towering and broad-shouldered, with short-cropped dark hair, a heavy jawline shadowed by stubble, and weathered tan skin marked by faint scars. The kind of man built by hard labor and harder choices. His leather jacket strained against his chest, and his cold blue eyes swept the room with the precision of someone who had once worn a badge or uniform, but no longer believed in rules. The second, Elias Kane, was younger, maybe 30, leaner but wiry strong, with slicked-back brown hair and sharp, angular features. His pale skin had a slightly unhealthy pallor, and his darting gray eyes revealed constant calculation, as though every movement was planned 3 steps ahead. Rebecca's heels clicked sharply against the stone as she stepped into the chamber, glancing briefly at the open cabinet, the pouches of gold, and the documents spread across the table. A small, knowing smile curved her lips. "Well," she said softly, "looks like you've been busy." Caleb straightened, shoulders squaring instinctively, keeping one hand low on Valor's collar. "You're trespassing," he said evenly, his voice low but steady. Rebecca ignored the warning, clasping her leather gloves behind her back. "You don't understand what you found," she said coolly, her gaze locked on the documents. "This evidence belongs to the Sterling estate, and if you're smart, you'll hand it over now." Valor stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Caleb and the intruders, hackles raised, lips curling back to reveal sharp white teeth. A deep, guttural growl reverberated from his chest, vibrating against Caleb's legs. Caleb shook his head slowly. "This isn't yours, Rebecca. You think money buys you the right to rewrite history? Not this time." Her smile vanished, replaced by a sharp glare. "I'm not here to debate morality, Mr. Rourke," she said flatly, signaling subtly to Grant and Elias. "I'm here to collect what my family is owed." Grant stepped forward first, cracking his knuckles, while Elias shifted to the side, circling quietly like a predator searching for an opening. Caleb adjusted his stance, instincts from his years as a Marine kicking in, scanning exits, assessing angles, counting breaths. The tension thickened until it became almost unbearable. Valor barked sharply, the sound exploding off the stone walls and startling Elias into freezing mid-step. Caleb used the moment to speak, his tone quiet but resolute. "You take one more step toward us, and I promise you, we're not leaving this room without a fight." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The chamber was silent except for Valor's low growl and the distant drip of condensation somewhere in the tunnels. Rebecca's jaw tightened, and though her posture remained composed, her eyes flicked briefly to the documents, betraying her impatience. Finally, she exhaled slowly, tilting her chin up in cold defiance. "You've made your choice," she said softly, stepping back into the shadows. "I'll give you one chance to reconsider, Mr. Rourke, because the next time we meet, I won't be asking." With that, she gestured for her men to follow, retreating into the tunnel as the sound of their boots faded gradually into the darkness. Caleb stood silent, his grip firm on Valor's collar until the air settled and the echoes disappeared completely. His muscles ached from tension, but his focus didn't waver. He glanced down at the documents and gold, the weight of Ethan's secrets pressing heavier on his shoulders than ever. He crouched beside Valor, rubbing behind his ears as the dog finally relaxed, though his amber eyes remained fixed on the passage Rebecca had disappeared into. "We need to move fast, buddy," Caleb murmured, gathering the documents into his satchel. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about Ethan and the truth." As they secured the chamber and began ascending the staircase back toward the safety of the mansion above, Caleb's mind churned with unspoken fears. He knew Rebecca wouldn't give up, and next time she wouldn't come quietly. The night over Ashford Hollow was quiet, but inside the Blackwood mansion the silence felt tense and fragile. The soft creak of floorboards echoed faintly as Caleb Rourke moved swiftly through the hallway, his boots muffled against the worn rugs. Valor, his loyal 5-year-old German shepherd with thick black and tan fur, walked ahead with his nose low to the ground, ears twitching at the faintest sound. The air carried the damp chill from the underground passages, and Caleb's thoughts raced faster than his heartbeat. The confrontation with Rebecca Sterling in the hidden vault still weighed on him. Her calculated threats, the greed in her eyes, and the quiet confidence of the two men at her side, Grant Myers and Elias Kane, had made one thing clear. This wasn't over. As Caleb tightened his grip on the satchel slung across his chest, packed with Ethan's documents and gold coins, Valor stopped abruptly and growled low, muscles tense beneath his glossy coat. "Easy, boy," Caleb whispered, crouching slightly. The growl deepened, vibrating against the stone floor beneath them. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of voices ahead, hushed, sharp, and echoing off the cold stone walls of the tunnel. Caleb dimmed the beam of his flashlight and pressed his back against the damp wall, his breath slow and controlled, the old Marine instincts settling into place. Rebecca's voice carried through the silence, clipped and cold. "He has the evidence. I told you, we take it back tonight. No mistakes this time." Beside her, Grant's deeper, rougher tone followed. "Let me handle it. One move, and he won't fight back." Caleb clenched his jaw. He could feel Valor's steady tremor beneath his hand, not from fear, but from restrained anticipation. He waited until the shadows lengthened on the tunnel wall, signaling their approach, then stepped silently into a narrow alcove carved into the rock. The moment they passed, Valor lunged forward without hesitation, slamming into Elias before the man could react. The German shepherd's teeth sank into the man's forearm just above the wrist, forcing Elias to drop the crowbar clutched in his hand. His sharp cry cut through the tunnel, startling Rebecca into spinning around. "Valor, hold!" Caleb ordered, his voice firm but controlled. The dog instantly adjusted, his powerful jaws loosening, but his amber eyes locked on Elias, keeping him pinned with his weight. Grant reacted next, swinging a heavy punch toward Caleb, who ducked instinctively, rolling aside. The blow connected with the stone wall instead, the sound reverberating painfully through the chamber. Caleb used the distraction to sweep Grant's legs, sending the towering man crashing hard onto his back. Rebecca froze for a fraction of a second, her perfectly composed facade finally cracking under the sudden chaos. Caleb's flashlight beam cut across her sharp features, blonde hair pulled tight, pale skin flushed beneath the strain, and green eyes blazing with restrained fury. "You don't have to do this," Caleb said sharply, breath steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "Walk away before this gets worse." Rebecca scoffed, straightening her coat. "You think I care about worse? That gold, those documents, they belong to my family. You're the one stealing from us." "They were Ethan's," Caleb countered, his tone steel-edged, "and Ethan wanted the truth to come out." Her lips curled into a thin, bitter smile. "Truth is written by the winners, Mr. Rourke, and tonight that's me." Before she could signal Grant again, Valor shifted his stance, growling louder, forcing the two intruders to hesitate. That moment of hesitation was all Caleb needed. He reached for the carved stone panel on the right-hand wall, the one Ethan had mentioned in his coded notes. His fingers traced the grooves of interlocking circles, pressing hard on the center symbol. A deep rumbling filled the chamber. The ground shuddered beneath them as an ancient mechanism groaned to life. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, and the stone wall behind Caleb slid upward, revealing a narrow escape tunnel. At the same time, a hidden barrier across the main passage began to descend slowly, sealing off the path Rebecca and her men had come through. "Go, Valor!" Caleb urged, stepping backward into the hidden corridor. The German shepherd released Elias and bolted after Caleb, ears flat and tail low, as Rebecca lunged forward with an enraged shout. But the stone barrier dropped fully into place with a thunderous slam, cutting her off. The silence that followed was deafening. Caleb leaned against the cool stone wall, chest heaving as he steadied his breath. Valor pressed firmly against his leg. "Good boy," he murmured, resting a hand on the dog's head. Valor's tongue lolled slightly as he panted, still on alert but calmer now. From the far side of the sealed barrier, Rebecca's voice rang out, muffled but sharp with fury. "You can't hide forever, Rourke. This isn't over." Caleb ignored her, focusing on navigating the narrow escape tunnel. After several minutes of careful steps, the passage led upward and opened into the mansion's wine cellar. Once above ground, Caleb pulled out his phone and immediately called Margaret Henderson. Margaret, a sharp-witted woman in her late 60s with short silver hair and warm but piercing hazel eyes, had been Caleb's most reliable ally since his arrival in Ashford Hollow. Despite her grandmotherly demeanor and soft-spoken tone, her memory was impeccable, and she possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of Blackwood's history, including secrets few in town dared whisper. She answered on the first ring, her voice calm but urgent. "Caleb, what happened?" "They're here," he said, his voice low and steady. "Rebecca, 2 hired men. They tried to take everything. I've sealed them inside one of Ethan's tunnels, for now." Margaret sighed softly, the sound carrying both worry and resignation. "I warned you she wouldn't give up. Listen to me carefully. I still have copies of Ethan's estate papers and the original records. If Rebecca tries anything through the courts, we'll be ready." Caleb hesitated. "We might not get that far, Margaret. She's not just fighting for property rights. She's desperate. And now she knows we have evidence that could ruin her family name." "I'll make the call," Margaret replied firmly, her tone shifting to quiet authority. "Sheriff Keller owes me a favor. We'll have officers on their way." Sheriff Daniel Keller arrived at the mansion 40 minutes later, accompanied by 2 deputies. Keller, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-50s with sun-weathered skin, salt and pepper hair, and deep lines etched from decades of work, carried himself with a calm, measured authority. He'd been sheriff of Ashford Hollow for over 20 years and knew every family feud, secret, and scandal buried in the town's history. After Caleb recounted the confrontation, Keller rubbed a hand over his jaw, exhaling slowly. "Rourke, I believe you, but you've just cornered a Sterling, and Sterlings don't forgive. I'll get patrols around the mansion tonight, but you'd better be prepared. This isn't finished." Caleb nodded solemnly, his gaze shifting toward Valor, who lay near the fireplace in the study, his chest rising and falling steadily. For a moment, Caleb allowed himself to breathe, resting a hand on the dog's head as the amber glow of the flames reflected in Valor's loyal eyes. He knew tonight's victory was temporary. Rebecca wouldn't walk away. Not now. And the deeper they dug into Ethan's secrets, the more dangerous this inheritance would become. The morning sun rose softly over Ashford Hollow, casting warm streaks of gold across the damp streets still glistening from last night's rain. Birds called faintly from the budding oaks, and the first blossoms of spring dotted the edges of the old Blackwood estate. From the second-floor balcony, Caleb Rourke stood with his shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the gravel driveway below, where 2 patrol cars idled near the gates. Valor, his 5-year-old German shepherd, sat loyally at his side, his amber eyes sharp and ears pricked, scanning the grounds as if he too understood the weight of what had just transpired. Down below, officers moved deliberately across the lawn, their boots crunching softly over the damp earth as they secured the perimeter. Rebecca Sterling stood between 2 deputies, her blonde bun slightly loosened, her pristine navy blazer smudged with dirt from the scuffle in the tunnels. Even now, she carried herself with an air of cold defiance, green eyes steady and unyielding. At her sides, Grant Myers and Elias Kane remained in handcuffs, both looking less composed than their leader. Grant's towering figure and bruised jaw bore the marks of last night's fight, while Elias, pale and sweating, refused to meet Caleb's gaze. At the center of it all stood Sheriff Daniel Keller, his tall, broad frame outlined against the pale morning light. The 55-year-old sheriff, with his salt and pepper hair and sun-creased skin, held a calm authority born from decades of mediating Ashford Hollow's deepest disputes. Today, though, his eyes were sharp and unwavering. "You've been holding back a storm for years, Caleb," Keller said quietly when he climbed the steps to the balcony. "But with what you found in those tunnels, the Sterling influence ends here." Caleb nodded, gripping the edge of the balcony railing. "The documents make it clear," he said, his voice low and steady. "Robert Sterling siphoned millions from Ethan, forged contracts, and destroyed lives to keep it hidden. Keller glanced over his shoulder at the deputies loading sealed evidence boxes into the patrol vehicles. The state prosecutor's going to love this. Ethan's papers, the financial ledgers, the shell company transfers. It's bulletproof. He paused before adding, "You might want to keep your doors locked, though. Families like the Sterlings, they don't let go easily." Caleb's jaw tightened, his thumb brushing unconsciously against Valor's fur. Let them come. I'm done running from other people's secrets. By midday, the sheriff's cars rolled away, carrying Rebecca, Grant, and Elias into custody. The estate grew quiet again, though attention still hummed beneath its silence. Caleb spent the afternoon sitting in the dusty library, Ethan's journals and photographs spread across the old oak desk. Valor rested near the hearth, his breathing slow, his amber gaze fixed on his human like a silent sentinel. As he turned the final page of Ethan's journal, Caleb felt the decades of pain stitched into the man's words. Betrayal, forbidden love, and the longing to leave behind more than a crumbling house. Ethan had wanted redemption, and he had hidden the truth so carefully for someone worthy to find it. That truth now rested in Caleb's hands. That evening, Margaret Henderson arrived, carrying a thick file folder tied with twine. At 68, her short silver hair framed her kind, intelligent face, though the sharp glint in her hazel eyes spoke of someone who missed little. "You'll want to see this," she said softly, lowering herself into the chair opposite him. "These are the certified documents Ethan prepared years ago. Estate deeds, banking disclosures, even court filings. He knew this day would come." Caleb opened the file carefully, scanning through notarized seals and Ethan's signature. It was all there. Legal confirmation naming Caleb as Ethan's last surviving heir and rightful owner of the Blackwood mansion and assets. Assets now valued at nearly $200 million. Margaret reached out, resting her warm, steady hand briefly over his. "It's over, Caleb. You've reclaimed what Ethan wanted for you." Caleb leaned back in his chair, the weight of it all settling over him. "Over," he repeated quietly, though his gaze drifted to Valor curled at his feet, knowing full well that some battles leave scars long after the war ends. 2 weeks later, the once-abandoned estate stirred with life for the first time in decades. Crews arrived to begin repairs, replacing broken shutters, clearing ivy-strangled pathways, and sanding down the grand staircase that had groaned beneath his boots since day one. Caleb walked among them quietly, sleeves rolled up, jeans streaked with sawdust, helping wherever he could. But while the repairs began, Caleb's vision stretched far beyond fixing crumbling walls. In Ethan's journals, he had read repeatedly about Clara Monroe, the woman Ethan had loved, whose memory haunted the mansion like a whispered hymn. Inspired by Ethan's sacrifices, Caleb made a decision. A portion of his inheritance would fund the Clara Monroe Foundation. He finalized the plans in the following weeks, poring over budgets late into the night while Valor dozed by the fire. The foundation would support veterans struggling with PTSD, provide care for retired K-9 service dogs, and fund shelters for abandoned children. The same causes Ethan had hinted at but never lived to see. On the day the foundation was announced, Margaret joined Caleb on the front steps of the restored Blackwood mansion. The local press gathered to record his short statement, his deep voice steady but quiet. "This house has carried too many secrets for too long," Caleb said, glancing toward the ivy-covered towers behind him. Ethan wanted it to be more than a monument to pain and betrayal. With the Clara Monroe Foundation, we're turning this inheritance into something that lasts, not just for us, but for everyone who needs a second chance." Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm, smiling faintly, her hazel eyes glistening with pride. Valor sat at Caleb's side, chest out and head high, wearing a polished leather collar bearing the Foundation's insignia. The cameras clicked as they captured the trio framed against the glowing mansion, a symbol of restoration after years of silence. That night, Caleb stood again on the second-floor balcony. The garden below had begun to bloom, white dogwoods, pink azaleas, and soft lavender stretching across the edges of the property. Fireflies danced lazily in the soft evening air. Valor sat pressed against his leg, ears flicking at the faint hum of distant crickets. Caleb rested a hand on the dog's head, his gaze steady on the horizon where the fading sunlight spilled against Ashford Hollow's quiet rooftops. "We did it, buddy," he murmured softly. "We gave Ethan's story the ending it deserved." And, for the first time in decades, the old Blackwood mansion no longer felt haunted. Sometimes life feels heavy, like the walls are closing in and hope has faded into shadows. Caleb knew that feeling. He had lost almost everything: his purpose, his stability, his faith. But then, something changed. It started with a letter, a loyal dog, and an old forgotten mansion. But what Caleb discovered was far greater than money or secrets. It was a reminder that even in our darkest valleys, God never leaves us behind. Through every locked door, every hidden passage, and every painful truth, Caleb realized one thing: miracles still happen. Sometimes they come in the form of second chances. Sometimes they come in the loyalty of a dog who never gives up. And sometimes they come quietly, like a whisper from above, reminding us that we are never truly alone. And maybe today, this message is meant for you. Whatever storm you're facing, whatever burden you're carrying, know this: God sees you. He hasn't forgotten you. Just like Caleb, there is a path forward, and sometimes the very thing you thought was broken can become the beginning of something beautiful. May God bless you and your family, protect you in your struggles, and fill your heart with hope. If this story touched your heart, share it so more people can believe in second chances. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journey of faith, hope, and miracles. Because sometimes the greatest treasures are not gold or silver. They are the people we save, the love we give, and the faith we hold on to when everything else falls apart.